Welcome back. Happy July 12th, 2021. One writer on Twitter put it this way today. Since the Cuban people don't want to live under socialism, can we swap out the liberals in America with them? They'd love it over there. It's everything they dream of. And while at it, send Obama and Jeff Flake, too. Anyone remember how Jeff Flake was the one Republican the press fell in love with in 2014 because he supported Barack Obama, supporting the Castros and giving them everything they wanted to maintain their power? Obama's Republican ally on Cuba was the headline in Politico. Then Jeff Flake wrote a book taking Barry Goldwater's famous title, The Conscience of a Conservative. Barry Goldwater, you know, the one who supported the blockade of Cuba and advocated its invasion if it didn't work. In that book that Jeff Flake wrote, The Irony of Ironies, or the Unseriousness of Unseriousness, is that a main theme of Jeff Flake's version of his book was to attack Donald Trump for coddling dictators. Well, he didn't coddle and fund and save the longest-serving and worst one in our very own hemisphere, the one who gave more Americans, more anti-communist Americans than any other country. That dictator, Jeff Flake coddled. Just as Bernie Sanders did, all the way up to trying to defend the Castros less than a year ago in a Democratic Party debate. You may recall Michael Bloomberg's surprise on that stage, saying to Bernie, "Are you nuts?" What Michael Bloomberg learned last year and missed until then is that all his billions couldn't help him change or, more importantly, understand the Democratic Party of today. It just ain't what it was in 1962 or 1982, for that matter. It is now so enamored with socialism that its rump and main ballasts support the Castro revolution, the Cuban government, and the Communist Party there. Why? Two reasons. One, Republicans don't, and B, it's anti-American, thus still part and parcel of the Khrushchev dream of anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movements being used to undermine the West, the kind of thing you hear every day from the squad. I always have to pause and point out when I make this point the grand irony of not knowing any history, especially from those who most attack our founding, is that we were the original and frankly best and most successful anti-imperialists and anti-colonialists in history. That's how we started in 1776, after all. Of course, those who don't want us to study that or want to switch the date 150 years earlier or so would naturally know very little of any of this, and of course be susceptible to any propaganda that would come about it. That's the point of distorting our history. You know that, right? 3 points from C.S. Lewis on this. We'll return to them in a bit. First, in The Abolition of Man, Lewis writes, if they embark on this course, the difference between the old and the new education will be an important one, where the old initiated the new merely conditions. The old dealt with its pupils as grown birds deal with young birds when they teach them to fly. The new deals with them more as the poultry keeper deals with young birds, making them thus or thus for purposes of which the birds know nothing. In a word, the old was a kind of propagation of men, transmitting manhood to men. The new is merely propaganda. A second point from C.S. Lewis in his book, The Hideous Strength, Why You Fool. It's the educated reader who can be fooled. All our difficulty comes with the others. When did you meet a workman who believes the papers? He takes it for granted that they're all propaganda and skips the leading articles to read the sports pages. He's our problem. We have to recondition him. But the educated public, the people who read the highbrow weeklies, they don't need reconditioning. They're all right already. They'll believe anything. Close quote. And finally, most importantly, once again from The Abolition of Man. For every one pupil who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. By starving the sensibility of our pupils, we only make them easier prey to the propagandist when he comes. For famished nature will be avenged, and a hard heart is no infallible protection against a soft head. Close quote. Think of that. A hard heart cannot be defeated by a soft head. Whose heads are being made soft? Whose emotions are being inculcated toward false sentiments? Let me repeat the main point here. If you want to know why I give such a damn about American history, it's because by starving the sensibility of our pupils, our young, we only make them, as C.S. Lewis said, easier prey to the propagandist when he comes. Who's to sit around and say, no, that's not true? Well, they have come, the propagandists. See almost every other monologue I've given for citations and examples. Perhaps now you can begin to see why the runner-up to the Democratic Party nomination had no problem putting in good words for the Castros and defending communism. He was just a little ahead of his time. We weren't quite ready for bread lines are a good thing just yet. We had to go through COVID conditioning first to get a taste and sense of it. Pause there for a moment. Has anyone made this connection before? Bernie Sanders defended bread lines after his trip to the Soviet Union, literally saying they were a good thing. Last year, for the first time, I think, in our history, Americans got to experience bread lines and toilet paper lines and paper towel lines and cleansing and antiseptic lines, just like Venezuela or Cuba. And then guess what? Truly a funny thing happened on the way to the empty grocery store and shuttered restaurants and businesses that were told by their governments they could not operate. Follow me here. A whole lot of people here said, aping Bernie Sanders, this is a good thing. For health. For safety. In French history, it was called the Committee for Public Safety, and later became known as the Reign of Terror. We weren't giving people breads and circuses here. That's the propaganda given to visitors. We were stopping the circuses here unless they needed to operate in the name of anti-racism and public health, and we took away the bread or made it scarce. And half the country looked around at what they had created as flown over by first-class delivery from the Communist Chinese Party, and they saw that it was good. They clamored for more. And they silenced or tried to silence anyone who questioned any of this. A priori censorship, if you will, the kind of thing the New York Times has spent nearly its entire legal budget on since the 1950s. But it's called prior restraint in their context, at least until now. Now the New York Times does not fight prior restraint anymore. It engages in it. And that's the thing. For when we say our own destruction cannot come from abroad but from within, we create it from within, abroad. Maybe that's a good book title for a serious undertaking of this study, within, abroad. Of course, Cuba was always a communist hellhole as a result of dough faces and intellectual idiots and traitors in America. After all, Castro and his failed reign of terror wasn't just saved by America under the Obama Flake administration. It was created by America years earlier. Anyone recall my interview with Ashley Winsberg, author of The Gray Lady Winked? There he wrote the New York Times in 1957 resurrected Fidel Castro. He was all but washed up when the New York Times sent a reporter who wrote about his dazzling group of government opponents and how they were democratic and anti-communist. He spoke of the love for Castro and how admired he was, quote, an educated man of ideals, courage, and remarkable leadership, close quote. By the way, that was everything in the late 1950s. Was so-and-so communist or anti-communist? Nixon met Castro and did not think he was an anti-communist, especially after Castro told Nixon he didn't believe in free elections. By the way, within 6 months of this, Castro eliminated habeas corpus, giving the power of arrest for anyone for anything. 2 years later, Castro was delivering an address in the United States as the keynote speaker to the American Society of Newspaper Editors. The rest is history. That's your media, that's your New York Times, and it's not new. Neither are dough faces, and neither is it new at Harvard. After he went to the press club, he went to Harvard, Fidel Castro did, and they had to give him a bigger room than originally designed, than originally planned. Indeed, he filled an athletic stadium. Harvard against America is not new either. I'd like today to hear from Jeff Flake and Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley and Cori Bush. Poor people are in the streets in Cuba protesting and getting arrested. You'd think those foregoing names would be all over this. Nope. The poor people are protesting the ideology that caused their misery, the ideology that Bernie Sanders, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley and Cori Bush support, and that Jeff Flake helped endow. Let's go to Freedom House, the nonprofit bipartisan country ratings organization founded by Eleanor Roosevelt. It says this about Cuba today, some 7 years after the great work of Obama and Flake. Quote, Cuba is a one-party communist state that outlaws political pluralism, suppresses dissent, and severely restricts basic civil liberties. The government continues to dominate the economy despite recent reforms that permit some private sector activity. The regime's undemocratic character has not changed despite new leadership, and a process of diplomatic normalization with Washington has stalled. Close quote. There were those at the time of our attempted normalization with Cuba who said to the likes of Obama and Flake, if Cuba wants to have normalized relations with the United States, there's a simple rule. Be normal. Obama and Flake lectured us that the U.S. giving in to Cuba would help normalize them. It didn't, because as Raul Castro himself bragged, he defeated Obama. The Cubans may be less free now than before, and Flake and Obama certainly helped bail out the government, or actually dictatorship. It's of a special interest to me, too, because no matter who the Republican, no matter who the conservative, from about 1959 onward, every single one of them, Republicans and conservatives, supported doing everything possible to help the immiserated of Cuba by eliminating the rule of the Castros, by bankrupting them, if possible. Every single conservative. Here's Barry Goldwater, for example, in the original conscience of a conservative. Quote, if the Red Army had landed in Havana, we would have come to Cuba's aid. Castro's forces, however, were native Cubans. As a result, a pro-communist regime has become entrenched on our very doorstep through the technique of internal subversion, and so it will always be with an enemy that lays even more emphasis on political warfare than on military warfare, and so it will be until we learn to meet the enemy on his own grounds, close quote. I'm not talking about giving them more money. It's an interesting week here. I wonder if the coaches for the NBA can tweet support for the people of Cuba today. Be a good week for it. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.